Being fashionable used to mean looking good. Well, thanks to a fad that started in the Pacific Northwest, high fashion now means, well...
Look, Mom, your favorite, Nirvana.
Thanks, phone dude.
Axel! Hi, Axel! Where's Axel?
Welcome back to the history of metalcore, part 2. Kinda? God, this has been a long time coming. Today, we're gonna be taking a look at grunge. Look, I'm not gonna lie to you and say without blank, we wouldn't have blank, but just, come with me for a second, okay? In part 1, we talked about how metalcore is the mixture of hardcore punk and heavy metal. Now we ask the question, what is grunge? And I'm not talking about how your socks get when you're in college and you're too broke to do laundry. Grunge is a genre of music that was created by fusing elements of punk rock and heavy metal. So with those similarities, you would think that grunge is partially responsible for creating metalcore, right? Wrong! Well, maybe not entirely. I think grunge is truly responsible for helping to create the alternative music subculture that so many bands still stand on in their, skate-high clad feet. Not to mention, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, metalcore was already, starting to do its own thing. And while we don't see chugs and modern breakdowns derived from Soundgarden or Alice in Chains, the importance of these bands cannot be overstated. These two scenes grew almost entirely separate of each other, but it's still worth mentioning because how similar these two styles of music are, maybe not they don't sound similar, but how they came to be is so incredibly similar. It's like two siblings, and one becomes a doctor and the other one grows weed for a living. Both totally respectable, just very different. So before we get into all of that, be sure to subscribe to my channel, leave me a like if you feel like you got some value from this video. I have new videos coming out all the time, so subscribe so you don't miss it. Now, as I mentioned in part 1, the year is 1984, and Black Flag is touring off of their newest album, My War. This album in particular was a huge departure from their previous sound. Some people didn't get it. Some people hated the band for it. They were like, "You've gone heavy metal now. What's your fucking problem, Henry?" He didn't write the music, but some of the younger fans that were in attendance of these shows saw them playing side 2 of My War and saw it as perhaps permission to play slower, to play heavier, to play dirgy, sludgier stuff. Chris Novoselic, who later went on to play bass for Nirvana, went to go see one of these shows with Buzz Osborne, and after this show, Buzz started writing slower, heavier, kind of sludgier stuff. Buzz Osborne, of course, from the Melvins. And you can really hear a lot of similarities between side 2 of My War and the Melvins' 1987 album, Gluey Porch Treatments. And I know what you're thinking, before you get on your keyboard and say, "Oh, well, James, actually, I would say that the Melvins are actually more sludge metal than they are grunge, but you can say whatever you want, really, but just so you know, you're wrong, unsubscribe." I know, they kind of stand in both camps. And now we get to the point where it gets confusing and kind of annoying because one band does something just a little bit differently and all of these different subgenres of whatever are born. It's like a guitarist sneezes and hits the wah pedal instead of the octafuzz, and now it's no longer post metallic noise rock, but it's psychedelic puppy shart core. What do you want from me? I'm just a man with a computer. But that slow, sludgy, grungy, goodness, that sounds like the worst candy bar. But that slow, sludgy, grungy goodness started to seep in to the minds of the people attending these shows and other people around the scene like Green River.
Well, I've been searching, baby, for so long that I don't even know what I'm looking for.
Another pioneer of grunge music. And Green River, another interesting band. They were one of the first bands to have the term grunge used to describe their music. They really lean in to the punk rock side of grunge. And after Green River broke up, many of the members went on to form bands like Mudhoney, Mother Love Bone, and Pearl Jam. One of the biggest and I think the only surviving band to this day. And like retrospectively, when you look at it, considering how big grunge was, it seems like, oh, it was this huge cultural like shift. It was massive. Everybody was changing their sound and it's just mind-blowing to know that the bulk of the grunge movement happened in the 83.78 squared mile radius of Seattle.
Where are you guys from?
Seattle.
Yes, there were bands doing similar things all over, but the bulk of what was going on was coming from Seattle or the surrounding area. From here, we got bands like Alice in Chains, Green River, Melvins, Soundgarden, Temple of the Dog, and of course, the Presidents of the United States of America, and Nirvana, I guess. Obviously, with Nirvana being the most influential of these bands, it is really interesting to go back and listen to Kurt Cobain especially talk about his musical influences, like the Sonics, and just like how early punk bands really like clung to that stuff. He shares that kinship with them, and that's why like when people say punk broke like finally in America, it was with grunge. In September of 1991, Nirvana released its major label debut, Nevermind. Flash forward 30-something years, the baby tries to sue, multiple times. That album was hoped to like do as well, maybe, as like Sonic Youth's Goo, which if you've never heard Goo, I urge you the second this video ends, go listen to Goo. You won't be sorry, it's such a good album. And with the first single from that album, Smells Like Teen Spirit, like it was like the world was a powder keg, and that was the spark that blew everything up. Like it was being played on MTV constantly. By Christmas, it was selling 400,000 copies a week. And soon after, in January, it replaced Michael Jackson at the top of the Billboard 200 list. Like it was huge, and it was surprising to the music industry because it not only popularized grunge, but it established the fact that like alternative rock, people want it. It's like a thing that people will buy. And it like changed the tide from like glam metal being the thing that people were into to something a little bit more like realistic, something that reflected reality a little bit better, which is grunge. You know, in the 1970s, punk bands who felt that the music industry neutered rock and roll proved that you don't need the approval of a label to go ahead and do what you want. And in the 90s, grunge bands proved that they could make something culturally relevant, good sounding, and commercially viable without the hands of a label, at least initially. Again, the world was basically ready for punk. And like the perfect contrast is like with glam metal, you know, it showed like the fun side of like substance abuse and like fun times with the ladies and beachy vacations and cars that drive too fast and all of the dumb fun stuff that like, oh, the good times will never end. And with grunge, the lyrics reflected the darker side of reality. It's like the world woke up from a big night out with a massive hangover and decided to write about it. Themes of rejection, self-loathing, the dark side of substance abuse, like religion, politics, like all of that like came in a very real package, the yin to the yang, like it can't all be good times. And along with the change in lyrics, there's a change in the role of the guitar in the band as well. No longer do we have like this, oh, I'm gonna show off my crazy technical skill and like these masturbatory guitar solos, and they were more subdued, like in service to the song, which in my opinion, I like both. I think a solo that serves the song is better personally. And then other bands started to receive positive attention because of the success of Nevermind. Pearl Jam released their debut album 10 in August of 1991, just a month before Nevermind. But album sales didn't pick up until the next year. By the end of 1992, 10 became this massive success. It was certified gold. It was number 2 on the Billboard 200. Soundgarden's album Bad Motorfinger, Alice in Chains' Dirt, also got a huge spike in sales and were in the top 100 of 1992, like top 100 albums sold. And unfortunately, like it got so big that it came crashing down.
Kurt Loder with an MTV News special report on a very sad day. Kurt Cobain, the leader of one of rock's most gifted and promising bands, Nirvana, is dead, and this is the story as we know it so far.
Kurt Cobain himself talked about how he never wanted to get famous, he just wanted to play music. After his unfortunate death in 1994, like it was kind of a death knell for grunge. It was a second day the music died, I guess. That same year, Pearl Jam refused to play at venues that Ticketmaster had like their hands in because of unfair business practices. And that prevented them from touring in the US for 3 years. When it comes to Ticketmaster, I always think of that meme where it's like the different fees for the concert, and it's like the why not fee and the fee 50 fum fee. Seriously though, fuck Ticketmaster. In 1996, Alice in Chains gave their final performance with Lane Staley, who later died in 1992 due to a drug overdose. And in 1996, Soundgarden and the Screaming Trees released their final album of the 90s. And of course, after the death of grunge, the music industry swooped in like a buzzard to just pick apart the flannel-clad corpse. Then we get post-grunge bands that were very commercially viable at the start of the 21st century. Post-grunge transformed the thick guitar sounds and candid lyrical themes into, a radio-friendly, uplifting musical package. It had an uplifting mainstream aesthetic. The distorted guitars, and we need to tamper that down, and we need a radio-friendly presentation. With post-grunge, they took grunge and they made it all nice, and they got it a haircut, and they gave it a shower, and they made it all prim and proper so that it can go meet your conservative parents and your youth pastor.
And he kidnapped Shamu and put her in a chlorine tank, okay?
Bands like Nickelback, Live, Bush, Puddle of Mud, Breaking Benjamin, who isn't as bad, but Collective Soul, Shinedown, Seether, ugh. Most of these bands I can't stand. I'm sorry. At least they did bring heavy-isher music a little bit more into the mainstream. And all this to say, it all happened so fast. It was hugely popular, and then it just burned out. Metalcore is still forming at this time. And it's almost like music from an alternative reality, where punk and metal fused together, and we got this really sincere, beautiful music. It just ended up, it was real. What they were singing about was so real, clearly, because a lot of them died because of what they were singing about. It's sad to see it go that way. I'm thankful for what they left behind, and if only they could have gotten the help that they needed, we could still be talking about the new Nirvana album coming out, I guess, or more Chris Cornell, who I think is one of the greatest losses musically that in my opinion that we've had in a long time. I love Chris Cornell. But all of that to say, the gritty, clean vocals, I do think when it comes to early 2000s metalcore, the tone and the music that was created in the 90s with grunge, it seeped into the minds of the bands that we love today. And around this time, there was another type of music coming up, a new type of metal, if you will. More on that later. You could say that had more of an impact on metalcore, and you might be right. But the importance of the shift of lyrics from happy good times to a more realistic, albeit really bleak reality, it helped shape the future of heavy music and alternative music that we listen to today. And no, I'm not trying to connect the dots and say without Nevermind we wouldn't have All That Remains. I really just think it's the story of alternative music, and since metalcore and grunge came from the same parents, it's interesting to see how they ended up so different but so similar. And that's all I have for today, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Keep an eye out for part 3. Be sure to leave a like, leave a comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you got some value from this video, if you were entertained by it, and I'll see you next time.